Welcome back to Football Unspoken. This is a special episode in the way that it's our 1 year episode for Football Unspoken, which Rob and I are really excited about. But, keeping the excitement and momentum going, Rob, we're going to get you straight into the trivia question.
Right.
Can you tell me which team had the biggest points lead come January in Premier League history?
Which team had? I know also one who lost the biggest lead, so I don't think it's them. I'm gonna go with Man United.
So a great shout. That's one half of the puzzle. It was actually Newcastle. Newcastle had a 12 lead point gain on Manchester United in the 95-96 season, which they then failed to win the Premier League as Manchester United overtook them.
Shocking.
Huh. So moving on from that, bringing it to the 24-25 season, Liverpool currently have a 4 point lead at the top of the Premier League with a game in hand. So they could have a 7 point lead. But the competition this year is Arsenal, Nottingham Forest, and Newcastle. So my question is, if Liverpool fail to win the Premier League this year, is that the biggest bottle of all Premier League titles?
Firstly, I appreciate you putting Newcastle in that conversation, especially after this weekend's performance. But in terms of it, no, I don't think so. I think it doesn't matter who's chasing you. If a 4 point gap is not big, it's two bad games. That's what it boils down to. You have the exact same season, except you have two worse games than your chasing pack, and you're done for. And for example, Arsenal losing their lead to Man City is, you wouldn't say it's a foregone conclusion. It's a bottle job, isn't it? But it's pretty easy to see how that happens with such a good Man City team. In the same way that Newcastle, it's a bottle job, but he's still looking at one of the best ever Premier League teams chasing them down. So there is something to be said about the quality of the chasing teams, but even then, that many points is a nightmare to drop, essentially, because that's what you've done. You've dropped 13 points essentially.
I disagree with you and go on to your point about the chasing pack. The chasing pack right now, we're too far in the season for it to be anyone else, but the chasing pack is an Arsenal team who are having their worst season in 3 years under Mikel Arteta. Nottingham Forest, which is basically being carried by Chris Wood, of all players, and Newcastle, which, as you said, have kind of just ended their 5 game winning streak with a performance against Bournemouth. The quality of the chasing pack is so poor in comparison to every other season. Kind of using the example from the trivia, so Newcastle blew a 12 point lead, which sounds horrendous. But as you just mentioned, that Manchester United team from that 95-96 team would have had all of the star players, Roy Keane's and Cantona's and Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, etc. There would have been quality players there who were playing quality football, chasing them. So there was actually points to drop and for them to catch up. The chance that even Arsenal, frankly, catch up Liverpool in 4 and maybe even 7 points in the next, whatever to be 17 matches, just seems close to impossible the way that Arsenal have been playing versus the way that Liverpool have been playing this season.
I get what you're saying, but the one thing I would also like to say is, the question I'm going to pose to you here, in answer to your question, is would you say that the Premier League right now is more competitive than it's ever been, especially this season?
It's a great question, which should be its own podcast, but I'm going to give you an answer anyway. I think it is more competitive now. We always used to see. I remember when Manchester United, I think it might have been Ferguson's last season or second last season, they lost to Blackburn, who ended up getting relegated, and that was a shock result. And at the time, that was still another one of those notches in the belt in the way of the Premier League's competitive and anyone can beat anyone. We've certainly got that at the moment, but you look at how Notts Forest can go from a relegation team to a title challenging team in one season. And they didn't even spend much money in this window. I know they did in previous windows, but by comparison, they didn't spend much in this season. And that shows how small that gap is actually from maybe the cusp of relegation all the way to, European spots. You can go on a run and kind of get there.
Yeah, 100%. But I think this is the point that I was going to make is that it's just one of those situations where dropping points is an expectation in modern football, is what I would say. Whereas back then it wasn't such an expectation. This is why I say the chasing pack is one thing, But to drop 4 points, to drop 5 points it's not a big margin, it's 2 games at the end of the day.
I will say I was also really hoping you were going to say, yeah, the competition this year, Liverpool, is no possible way they can lose the title from here. And the reason why is I would be amiss as an Arsenal fan not to bring this up. But if you look at the actual stats, and I like stats more than you do, but if you look at the underlying stats of the Arsenal season, they've got the best defensive record in the Premier League right now, least goals conceded, and they're tied for second most goals scored in the season. So it's all good and well to say performance-wise they haven't been at it, and that's very obvious to see. But actually, they're still second for goals and first for least conceded, which is one of the hallmarks of seeing if a team's actually a title challenger or realistically going to compete for the title. I'll give you another example of that where it showed where those stats can actually tell the story of when Manchester United under Mourinho came second to Manchester City. A lot of people were saying, well, they're going to push on next year, right? They're going to challenge for the title. But if you go back and look at goals scored and goals conceded that year, they were the second best defensive team in the league, which is great. But offensively, they were only the sixth best team in the league. They scored I think like 40% less goals than Manchester City, and that really matters. And that's why I say the fact that Arsenal are just behind Liverpool in goals scored and they're above them in less goals conceded. I'm not saying that no, that's the storyline. Now they're going to overtake them. But this narrative that Arsenal are nowhere and have no chance of catching Liverpool is actually really short-sighted when you look past purely the performances of late.
Yeah, I was also going to say that because I know we were talking about the quality of teams, and I'm going to be frank here, and let's be honest, this Arsenal team isn't the same level as Man City were when they went on their title-winning charge, same as Man United. But to sit here and pretend they're not a good team is very silly. And I know the one thing that we've spoken about previously, it might not have been on the podcast, it might have just been personally, but talking about XG and this idea that XG kind of does settle out at some point. If you're looking at teams that are overperforming their XG, more often than not, whether it's this season or next season, there will be a big drop off. And I remember last year, I'm pretty sure Nottingham Forest were never touted to do this well, let's be entirely honest. But last season, Nottingham Forest, they were underperforming their XG by a fairly significant margin over a season. And I think there's a big misunderstanding of what exactly that kind of stat shows, because it's quite a new stat. It is quite difficult to sit there and go like, oh well. It doesn't help when you got fans going, oh well, XG wise, like Liverpool should have lost to 8 different teams. I'm like, yeah, XG is an indicator. It's not the be all and end all, But I do think that there is something to be said for the fact that Arsenal, while the results haven't shown how good they've been, if you get what I mean, I think the big thing about them is that performances in certain games have shown how good a team they can be, and unfortunately, how bad a team they can be. And I think that's the problem. And it doesn't help when you're losing players like Saka quite consistently.
And actually, another example of a team who's performing better this year, where last year they underperformed their XG. I think they actually underperformed their XG for the last 2 seasons, is Fulham, and they're doing a lot better this year. So you are right. Over the course of a couple of seasons, teams that you tend to come back to the mean of your team's XG, and you can see a lot of examples about that. What's clear to me is I'm not going to convince you that if Liverpool don't win the league this year, it'll be the biggest bottle of all time. But let me dial it down a little bit, to summarize here. Would you say Liverpool not winning the league from this current position and considering the chasing pack would be considered a bottle at all?
I would say it is. I think they've got the game in hand, and the game in hand's against Everton. If the game in hand was sitting there against a Man City or an Arsenal, it's a different story. But let's be honest, we always bash Everton on this channel. And actually, Everton.
Why stop now?
Exactly. Why stop now? And Everton are not a team I'm expecting to challenge Liverpool in any way, really. I'm expecting that to be a 7-point gap, and I think to lose out a 7-point gap is a big drop. It's a drop, and at the end of the day, you're expecting Arsenal or Nottingham Forest, or on the back burner, maybe a Chelsea or Newcastle, to go on a mad run, and Liverpool, you'll have to play Liverpool in that period. And I think if Arsenal can beat Liverpool, we might have a bit of a title dash on, but I can't see them dropping it. So if they did, I would say it is a bit of a bottle.
Yeah, just one comment. If Chelsea were to go on the mad dash and win the Premier League from here, to be the end of football for all of us. Anyway, guys, with that, I'm going to close this one out. Let us know if you think Liverpool failing to win the Premier League from here would be the biggest bottle of all Premier League title races. And if not, why not? Until next time, this has been Football Unspoken. Cheers.